Claire Sullivan walking through the company lobby, suddenly stopping and laughing. Marcus, I never imagined the top student everyone admired would end up pushing a mop in this building. She strides over, snatches the mop from the nearly 40-year-old white man's hands, and raises it in front of hundreds of employees. A man pushing 40, who only knows how to hold a mop. This is as far as you'll ever go. Marcus Carter, quietly picking up his cleaning tools. I'm truly grateful for this job. Claire deliberately dumps the entire bucket of dirty water at his feet. Then spend the rest of your life doing it. Are you sure you won't regret what you did today? Regret? That word doesn't exist in my dictionary. Very well. We'll be seeing each other again very soon. The Ridgeline Tower on Marsh Street opened its doors at 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 6:40, the floors on the ground level were already dry. The man who dried them worked in a gray uniform with no name stitched on the pocket. He signed the vendor log at the security desk every morning as M. Reeve, which was the name on the contract Coastal Building Services had filed with the branch, and the guard who slid the clipboard toward him never once read it. He moved through the lobby in a straight-line corner to corner the way a man moves when he has thought about the route in advance. He was 38 years old, unhurried, and he did not feel silence with talk. Dwayne Falk worked that desk. He was heavy-set, 60 pounds past what his doctor wanted, and he had a habit of talking to whoever came through before 7 because nobody else was there. He learned in the first week that the new man on the crew would listen to anything and volunteer nothing, and Dwayne found that restful. Walter Briggs had been cleaning that building for 19 years and had watched 40 or 50 men come through the same job. Most of them worked with headphones in. This one didn't. This one asked which elevator bank ran hottest in the afternoon, which conference rooms got booked and then abandoned, which floor threw away the most paper. You planning to write a book about us? Walter said on the third morning. I'm planning to do the job right, the man said, and kept moving. Walter answered the questions anyway because it was easier than not answering, and because in 19 years nobody had asked him anything that specific. The crew called him Reeve. Nobody on the executive floors had reason to learn any name at all. In a building where 412 people worked, the ones who emptied the bins were furniture noticed only when something was wrong, never noticed when everything was fine. He had counted on that. He had also counted on how much a building tells you when it believes nothing is listening. By the end of his first week, he could have drawn the org chart from memory without ever seeing one. He knew that the 11th floor stayed late, and the 12th floor left at 4:30. He knew which manager sent email at midnight and which one presented it as her own the next morning. He knew that the break room on 9 had a sign taped to the microwave that read, "Clean up after yourself. This means you." And that the tape had yellowed, which told him something about how people here spoke to each other. He knew most of all that the Ridgeline branch had lost 31 employees in 14 months, and that not one exit interview in the file had said a single true word about why Claire Sullivan ran that branch. Her office sat at the north end of the 11th floor, behind glass that had been ordered in a specific tent because she had not liked the first tent. She was 36, and she had been the youngest branch director in the company's history when she took the chair. And she had said that sentence out loud enough times that people had stopped hearing it. She had a way of walking the floor that made conversations end. Not because she shouted. She had never needed to shout. She would stop beside a desk, look at a screen for 4 or 5 seconds without comment, and move on. And the person at that desk would spend the rest of the afternoon trying to work out what she had seen. Todd Bramble, who ran client operations and had learned early that Claire's approval was the only currency in the building, called this leadership. He said it in meetings. He said it in the elevator. Gerald Whitmore, who ran facilities and had 2 years left before his pension, said nothing and signed whatever Todd put in front of him. Nora Delaney had been at Ridgeline 11 months and still hadn't learned the trick of it. She was 29, 2 years out of a job she had left, because a manager there talked to people the way people here talk to the cleaning crew. She held elevators. She said good morning to the crew, and she noticed in the new man's second week that he never said it. First he waited, and then returned it as if he had decided in advance not to impose himself on anyone. You don't talk much, she said, holding the door for his cart. I listen a lot, he said. It's a better job that way. She laughed, and he let her, and the doors closed on 12. and neither of them thought about it again. Claire saw him for the first time on a Tuesday in late September. She came out of the north stairwell because the elevators were slow, already talking to Todd about a quarterly number, and she was 4 steps into the corridor before her eyes went past a man on his knees with a putty knife, scraping something off the baseboard. She stopped walking. Todd kept talking for another sentence and a half before he realized he was talking to nobody. The man on the floor looked up. He didn't stand. He didn't look startled or ashamed, and that more than the face itself was what made her certain. "Marcus," she said. "Claire." It had been 14 years. In that time, she had built a story about him in her head, the way people do about anyone who once stood between them and something they wanted. And the story had never once included a man in a gray uniform on the 11th floor of her building, at Weston. He had been the one the professors used as a reference point. Do it the way Carter did it. He had taken the Aldridge Fellowship in their 3rd year, the one Claire had been told for 2 straight semesters was hers, and he had taken it without campaigning, without asking anyone for anything, which had somehow been worse. Her father read about it in the alumni bulletin and said not unkindly that some people were simply built differently, and Claire had carried that sentence for 14 years. The way you carry a stone in a shoe, you refuse to take off. Then Marcus graduated and went quiet. No reunions, no alumni page, no mentions anywhere she had ever looked, and she had looked in the small hours more than once. Now here he was on his knees holding a putty knife. Todd Bramble watched Claire's face change and understood that something valuable was happening, though he did not yet know what. "You two know each other. We went to school together," Claire said. "He finished first in our class." Todd looked at the putty knife. He looked back at Claire, and because he had been reading her for 3 years and had never once guessed wrong, he laughed. The sound carried down the corridor to 4 desks that pretended not to hear. Marcus went back to the baseboard. That should have been the end of it. It was not, because Claire spent the rest of that day discovering something she had not expected, that the stone in her shoe had come loose, and that it felt extraordinary. She raised it at the 2 o'clock. She mentioned it to Gerald Whitmore in the hallway. By Thursday, she had told it to a client on the phone, laughing, describing the moment she rounded the corner and found the smartest man she had ever met on his hands and knees in her building. She told it well. She had been rehearsing it since Tuesday. It moved through the floors the way that kind of thing moves. By the following week, people who had never spoken to him knew he had been a genius once. They said it that way once, and it made the uniform funnier. Someone left a college brochure on his cart with the corner folded down. Someone else started calling him professor. It was not cruel at first, and that was the part he noticed. It was said the way people repeat something they have heard from someone more important, testing whether they are allowed. They were allowed. Claire made sure of it. She began finding reasons to be wherever he was standing, with her arms folded in doorways, until the silence forced something out of somebody. "The fellowship committee sent me a note that year," she said once in an empty conference room on 12. "They said the decision was very close." "I remember it being close," he said, wiping down the table. "Do you ever think about what you'd be doing now if it had gone the other way?" He finished the last section of the table before he answered. "I think about what people are doing now, not what they'd be doing." Claire read that as a man too beaten to defend himself, and she took the reading with her out the door. Walter Briggs watched the whole thing from the corridor. He was 63 and had a shoulder that had been wrong since a fall in a stairwell nobody had ever filed a report about, and he had learned 19 years ago that the fastest way to lose a job in a building like this was to have an opinion in front of the wrong door. "You want my advice, you don't answer her at all," Walter said afterward. "She's fishing. Give her nothing. She gets bored. She won't get bored. Then you got a problem." "No," Marcus said. "The building has a problem. I'm just standing where it shows." Walter didn't know what to do with that, so he let it go. And the two of them finished the floor without speaking. There was a woman on the 8th floor named Ruth Ellison, who had been at Ridgeline 6 years and who stopped him in the corridor at the start of October to ask whether the crew had thrown out a box from under her desk. She had been moved to a smaller desk twice in a year, both times on a Friday, and both times she had come in Monday to find the move already done. She asked about the box. The way people ask about things they know are gone. "I'll look," he said. And he did look, and it wasn't there. He wrote her name down that night. 6 years to desk moves, no conversation about either. It was the 14th name on a list that had started as a page. The company's fall event took place on the second Friday of October in the ground floor atrium. A quarterly all-hands with catering, a stage, and a screen showing regional performance in 8-foot numbers. Attendance was mandatory. Hundreds of people stood with paper plates waiting for Claire to take the microphone, and the cleaning crew worked the perimeter the way they always did, invisible in the wide margins of the room. Marcus was mopping a spill near the east column when Claire came down the main stair. She had already seen him. She had been looking for him. Later, when it was picked apart in a boardroom that was the detail nobody could explain away, she came down a stair that took her nowhere she needed to go, and she timed her arrival for the moment. The room went quiet in anticipation of the microphone. She stopped 3 steps inside the atrium floor and laughed out loud, and the sound reached the back of the room because the acoustics in that atrium had cost a great deal of money. Marcus, the man who finished first in our class, is holding a mop. 400 heads turned. She crossed the open floor. She took the mop handle out of his hands, not roughly, which was somehow worse the way you take something from a person you have decided cannot object, and raised it above her head, where every person in the building could see it. A man almost 40 who can only hold a mop, Claire said, will hold one his whole life. The laughter came in pieces. Todd Bramble's first loud and immediate from near the stage, then a handful from the client operations cluster, who had learned to laugh when Todd laughed, then more spreading outward until it had the shape of a wave, and by then nobody was certain what they were laughing at, only that everyone else had started. Nora Delaney did not laugh. She was standing near the catering table with a plate in her hand, and she felt the room turn, and she looked down at the plate and did not raise her eyes again. Gerald Whitmore studied the floor. Priscilla Vance, who ran personnel for the branch, stood 8 feet from the stage with her arms at her sides and her face entirely still. Marcus said nothing. He bent, picked up his bucket and set it upright. "I'm grateful for this job." He said it evenly without pleading, and it landed in the room wrong because a man being humiliated is supposed to sound humiliated. And this one sounded like he was stating a fact he had thought about for a long time. Something in Claire moved at that. Not shame, the opposite. The calm was a door she had not been able to open in 14 years. And here it was again, closed in front of 400 people who were finally watching her be the one who won. She lowered the mop, took the bucket by the rim, and kicked it over. Gray water went across the marble and over his shoes and up the legs of his uniform, and the sound of the bucket rolling was the only sound in the atrium because the laughter had stopped the instant the water moved. "Then keep this job forever," Claire said. Marcus looked down at the water, spreading toward the column. Then he looked at the crowd, not at any one person, but across them slowly in a way several people would remember afterward and be unable to describe. Then he looked at her. "You won't regret what you just did." Claire smiled, and it was a smile of total victory. The kind that comes only to someone who has been carrying something for 14 years and has just now set it down. Regret. That word isn't in my vocabulary. He nodded once, as if she had confirmed something, and picked the mop up off the floor where she had let it fall. "All right," Marcus said. "You'll get your answer sooner than you'd like," he said it quietly. Claire heard the last empty line of a man with nothing left, and she walked to the stage and took the microphone, and the quarterly numbers went up on the screen in 8-foot figures, and the meeting ran 20 minutes over. Behind the crowd, he mopped up the water. It took 4 minutes. Walter came over with a second mop without being asked, and worked the far edge of the spill, and neither man spoke until it was done. 19 years I've been here," Walter said finally. "Never seen that. You've seen it? Just not that loud." He wrung out the mop, rolled the bucket toward the service corridor, and stopped at the door to look back at the crowd, breaking into groups around the catering table at Todd Bramble, laughing with a hand on someone's shoulder at 400 people who had watched and had not moved. That was what he took out of the room with him. Not the water, not the mop. The fact that in a room of 400 people, not one had stepped forward. By Monday, the story had a new ending in every telling. On the 8th floor, he had begged. On the 9th, He had cried. Nobody who had actually been in the atrium said either of those things, but nobody corrected them either, because correcting the story would have meant admitting they had watched. Claire learned that week that what she had done in front of 400 people had cost her nothing. No call from personnel, no question from the regional office. Priscilla Vance had stood 8 feet from the stage and had written nothing down. What Claire took from the silence was not relief, it was permission. She began scheduling around him. The crew worked a fixed rotation lobby and atrium at 6 floors 8 through 12 by 11 service corridors. After 4, Claire had Gerald Whitmore change it. Not by memo. She stopped him in the hallway outside facilities and said she wanted the 11th floor done in the middle of the day when the floor was full. And Gerald, who had 2 years left before his pension and had spent 19 months not disagreeing with her, said he'd take care of it. So Marcus cleaned the 11th floor at 1 o'clock in the afternoon between 2 rows of desks, while 40 people typed and did not look up. That was the first week. The second week, she found reasons to walk the route with him, appearing at the end of a corridor with a coffee in her hand and following at a distance of 10 feet, saying nothing and then saying something. You had an offer senior year. Hollis and Reed. The department posted it. I remember, he said, working the corner of a window. What happened to it? It went another direction. Claire watched him finish the pane. That's a very calm way to describe 14 years. He didn't answer, and she took the silence, the way she had taken every silence since October. As a man with nothing to put in it, the requests grew. The freight elevator on the west side had been out of service since spring, and rather than route recycling through the loading dock, Claire told Todd Bramble the cleaning contractor could handle it by hand. Todd related as if it had been his idea. Twice a week, Marcus carried compacted bundles down 11 flights, 60 pounds at a time, past the landing where 2 analysts smoked and stopped talking when he passed. Walter tried to take half of it the first day. Your shoulder, Marcus said. I've got a shoulder. You've got a woman who wants to watch. Then let her watch me. Walter stood on the landing with his hands on his hips, breathing hard, looking at a man 25 years his junior, carrying the second bundle. You're not right, he said. Whatever you are, you're not a floor guy. A floor guy would have quit or blown up by now. Marcus set the bundle down on the 8th floor landing. How many people have quit since you've been here, crew? Not the desks. 6. 7 in a couple of years. Why? Same reason. Somebody up top decides they don't like your face, and they wear you down. Nobody says anything because who's going to? You put in a complaint. It goes to a manager who golfs with the manager you're complaining about, and then you're the problem. Did anyone ever write it down? Write what down? Nobody's got it in writing that they're being made small. Marcus picked the bundle back up. Somebody should start. Nora Delaney had not spoken to him since the atrium. She had gone home that Friday and sat in her car in the parking structure for 20 minutes without turning the key, replaying the moment she looked at a plate of food instead of at a man standing in dirty water. What she understood in that car was something she didn't like. She had not been afraid of Claire. She had been afraid of the 400 other people who were laughing. She started leaving a coffee on his cart, never handed to him, left in the service corridor on 12 Black. No note before the floor filled up. It took 11 days for him to catch her. You don't have to. I know. I mean, you shouldn't. Not where people see. Nora's face went hot. That's what I've been telling myself. It's not a good thing to hear out loud. It wasn't a criticism, he said. It was information. There's a difference between the two, but not in this building. She almost asked what he meant. Then Todd Bramble came around the corner with 2 colleagues, and Nora walked toward the elevator with her badge already out, and neither of them mentioned it again for a long time. What he had by the end of November was a picture, and the picture had stopped being about Claire Sullivan somewhere in the middle of it. He had come to Ridgeline for a number, 31 departures in 14 months. In a branch posting the strongest client retention in the region was a contradiction that appeared nowhere in a quarterly report. The exit interviews pursuing other opportunities 31 times in 31 different handwritings, which is a thing that does not happen naturally. He had expected to find one bad director. That would have been simple. A bad director is a personnel matter, and personnel matters are solved with a signature. What he found instead was a system that did not require her. He could not open a file inside that building. The badge on his hip opened a service corridor and nothing else. What he had instead was a laptop in a rented apartment 9 minutes from Marsh Street and an account on the parent company's document system that had been provisioned to him the day the board approved the assignment. Every night, he pulled records against what he had seen that day, and the two halves of the picture met in the middle. The Thursday operations call was on the calendar system as a routine review. Todd's own notes filed to the shared drive because Todd filed everything he was proud of, spent the last 5 minutes on what he called culture flags. The flags were people who had raised concerns. 4 schedule changes in 2 months carried Gerald Whitmore's approval, and no supporting documentation, and each one placed a person where they could be seen being made small. Gerald had signed them the way a man signs a delivery slip. Priscilla Vance kept 2 folders on the same employee, one that went into the file, one that went to the director's office. She had done it before Claire arrived for a different director because it was how the branch had always run. That was the entry he sat with the longest, because it meant the practice belonged to the building. He pulled the 31 exit files and read everyone. Then he began calling the people who had written them in the evening from the apartment, introducing himself by his own name and his own title, and every one of them told him a story that did not appear anywhere on the page they had signed. Ruth Ellison's box was in none of it. 2 desk moves in a year, both on Fridays, and no record that anyone had ever asked her a question about either. The cruelty was not the disease. The cruelty was a symptom of a place where the fastest route to safety was alignment with power, and where the price of decency had been set high enough that only somebody 11 months in was foolish enough to pay it. He could have ended it in an afternoon. That was the part he sat with in the service corridor on 12 at 7 in the morning with a coffee somebody had left on his cart. 1 call. Richard Hensley at the regional office. Car in front of the building by noon, and by 2 Claire Sullivan would be walking out the north entrance with a box. And then what? Then Todd Bramble would run the branch, and Todd would be careful for 6 months. Then Gerald would sign the same forms for a different signature. Then Priscilla would keep 2 folders for the next director because nobody would ever ask her why she kept 2. The 400 people in the atrium would tell themselves for the rest of their careers that it had been one woman and that they had merely been in the room. Removing Claire would fix the story. It would not fix the building. So he stayed, and he wrote it down. The document reached 62 pages by the first week of December. Dates, floors, names, exact wording. Who authorized what, which decisions were made about people who were not in the room. He kept a second section that was much shorter. A coffee black. No note. Walter reaching for a 60-pound bundle with a shoulder that had been wrong for years. Dwayne Falk at the desk saying good morning to a contractor at 6 o'clock in the morning every single day for 4 months. He was aware writing those pages that he was keeping a ledger with 2 columns, and that the short column was going to matter more at the end than the long one. He gave it until the branch review in January. Claire, meanwhile, had begun using him in front of clients. The first time was almost accidental. A logistics group from Fairfield came through for a facility tour in early December, while Marcus was on his knees at the baseboard, a job she had put back on the schedule herself. She stopped the group and pointed, "That's our detail work. We don't outsource pride here." The clients laughed politely. Marcus kept working. Todd Bramble, walking behind the group, caught the joke a half-second late and repeated it to the 2 people nearest him louder. After that, it was a fixture. When Fairfield returned, Claire timed the tour. When a partner from the Marchetti Group came for a quarterly review, she assigned the conference room service to him so that a man she had gone to college with poured water into glasses for 11 people discussing a contract worth $2.4 million. She watched his hands while he poured. She was looking for a tremor. There was none. He set the pitcher down, checked the level in each glass, and left without a sound. And Claire found that the absence of the tremor made her want to escalate, which was a thing she did not examine. Todd supplied the escalations she didn't have to ask for. The loading dock inventory, since the crew was down there anyway. The parking structure stairwells, which had not been on any contract in 6 years. Each arrived in her inbox framed as an efficiency, and each was approved in under a minute, and neither of them ever wrote the real reason down because neither imagined a day when someone would read the whole file at once. Gerald signed. Priscilla filed. By the middle of December, the floor had stopped seeing a man carry recycling down 11 flights twice a week, which was worse than the laughing had been. There was one afternoon that Marcus recorded in the short column. He was clearing the 9th floor break room when Ruth Ellison came in, filled a cup, and stood at the counter with it without drinking. "They found my box," she said. "It was in a storage room on 2. It had been there since August." "That's good." "It isn't really. Nobody put it there by accident." She looked at the sign on the microwave and then away from it. "You know what? I keep thinking I've been here 6 years. I could leave tomorrow. And the only person who'd notice within a week is you." He didn't tell her she was wrong. He wrote her sentence down that night, word for word, and it went into the report ahead of everything else on the page. The January branch review was the largest meeting Ridgeline held. Every manager, every team lead, every analyst who could be spared 300 people in the atrium, with chairs set out in rows and a table at the front with 4 seats for the regional delegation. Claire had prepared for 6 weeks, retention reworked, the departure figure buried inside a rolling average. A slide on culture built around a photograph of the October all-hands taken from an angle that showed only the stage. The crew had set out the chairs at 6 and were breaking down the staging cart along the east wall at 9 when she saw him. Something in her went cold and fast. Not because he was doing anything, because of how he was standing, not bent over the cart, not moving, just standing along the back wall of her most important meeting, with his hands at his sides, watching the room the way a person watches a room they intend to remember. She lifted the microphone. "Excuse me, we have leadership arriving in 10 minutes." 300 heads turned to the back wall. Marcus put a hand on the cart to move it. "No," Claire said. "I'd like security, please." 2 men in navy blazers came in from the north door. The room had gone completely quiet. Not the anticipatory quiet of a meeting about to start, but the other kind, where 300 people simultaneously decide to become furniture. Her voice came through the atrium speakers flat and clear, and entirely unhurried. "A janitor is not qualified to stand in this room." Todd looked at his notes. Gerald looked at the platform. Priscilla's second-row folder on her lap wrote nothing. Nora Delaney was in the 5th row. She felt her hand start to move, actually felt it, the beginning of standing, and then she felt 300 people around her not moving, and she stayed in the chair. She would think about that for a long time afterward, that it had not been Claire who kept her in the chair. Dwayne Falk was one of the 2 men in blazers. He had checked this man in at 6 o'clock in the morning every day for 4 months and had never once looked at the name on the log. He stopped a step short and did not put a hand out. "Sorry, man," he'd said quietly, and gestured toward the north door. Marcus turned the cart across the room near the service corridor. Walter Briggs had come out with a mop in his hand and stopped. The 2 men looked at each other for perhaps 2 seconds. Walter's jaw moved. He didn't speak. Marcus gave him the smallest shake of the head. "Not yet," and pushed the cart toward the north door. The north door opened before he reached it. 4 people came through in coats, still cold from the street, moving at the pace of people who have never had to wait for an elevator. The delegation was 11 minutes early and had walked into an atrium of 300 silent employees and 2 officers escorting a man with a cleaning cart toward the exit. Richard Hensley was at the front. He ran the region. He had a face people recognized from the annual report and a habit of ending conversations by entering rooms. And he ended this one by doing something nobody present could process. He walked past the platform. He walked past Claire Sullivan, whose hand was raised in greeting, with the remote still in it. He crossed the length of the room to the back wall and put out his hand. "Mr. Carter, we're early. My apologies." Marcus took it. 300 people watched the regional president shake hands with the janitor, and nobody moved because there was no available thought to move toward. Claire's arm came down slowly. Eleanor Ashford, who had come from the board, stepped onto the platform and lifted the microphone from its stand with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. "Good morning. I understand the meeting started without us. I'd like to correct something before it goes further." She let the room settle. "The gentleman at the back is Marcus Carter. He is the chief executive officer of the parent company. In September, The board assigned him to this branch under a vendor contract in another name to assess workplace culture management capability and the conduct of this branch's leadership before any restructuring decision was made. That assessment concludes today. Nobody laughed. Nobody made any sound at all. A woman in the fourth row put both hands over her mouth. A man near the aisle turned to look at the back wall and turned forward again immediately as if caught. Todd Bramble's face had gone the color of paper, and he was looking at his own hands. Nora Delaney sat very still and felt something that was not vindication. It was closer to nausea. She had left a coffee on a cart, as she had also sat down when her hands started to move, and she understood now that the man at the back wall had been standing there for both. Marcus set the brake on the cart and walked up the center aisle in a gray uniform with no name on the pocket, past the managers and the analysts, and the team leads past Priscilla Vance with her folder past Gerald Whitmore and stepped onto the platform. Claire had not moved. She was 6 feet from him. She had been through 4 different faces in 90 seconds and had landed on none of them. What was there when he reached the platform was the thing underneath all 4, the recognition arriving in one piece that the man she had spent 4 months destroying in public had been the man deciding what happened to her. "Marcus," she said. Her voice didn't carry. "Miss Sullivan." He took the microphone Eleanor offered and turned to the room. "I'll keep this short. You'll all read the rest of it." He gave them the number. First, the 31 departures in 14 months in the branch, with the best retention in the region, and 31 exit interviews carrying the same phrase in 31 different handwritings. "I came here expecting to find one person," he said. "That would have been convenient. What I found was a method that doesn't need any particular person to run it." He did not itemize it from the stage. He named 3 things. He named the Thursday call and the word used on it for employees who raised concerns, and Todd Bramble did not look up. He named 4 undocumented schedule changes signed by a man who never read them, and Gerald Whitmore closed his eyes. He named a filing practice that predated the current director by 7 years and said that its age was the point that it belonged to the branch and not to anyone standing in the room. "There's a sign on the microwave on 9. He said it's an instruction issued by someone who didn't want to have a conversation aimed at someone they decided was beneath one. That sign is this branch in one sentence. Then he described October flatly without raising his voice. The atrium, the mop over her head. The sentence about a man almost 40, the bucket. He said 400 people had been in the room. He said the laughter began with one person near the stage and spread outward until nobody was certain what they were laughing at. That part is not about Miss Sullivan. One person cannot make 400 people laugh. 400 people can decide to." He described the last 20 minutes. The back wall, the sentence about qualification. 300 people who heard it and let it stand. Nobody stopped it. That is the finding, not the conduct of one director. The fact that in 4 months, in a building of 412 people, 3 of you did anything at all, and one of them was a security officer who apologized while doing what he'd been told. He set the microphone on the table. "There's no photograph of me anywhere in this company, and I've never given an interview. That's a preference, not a strategy. And it's the reason the board could send me. I didn't come here to be recognized. I came to see what this branch does to the people it decides don't matter. I have the answer." The formal process took 9 days. The report ran 206 pages. The 62 pages of nightly entries were the spine. Around them sat the personnel files, the unsupported authorizations. Todd Zone filed notes, the 31 exit interviews, and 11 recorded follow-up conversations with people who no longer worked at Ridgeline. Claire Sullivan was terminated for cause-sustained abuse of authority, targeted humiliation of a subordinate worker, use of scheduling authority as an instrument of that humiliation, and misrepresentation of retention figures in materials submitted to the regional office in December. Todd Bramble was terminated. The findings cited the culture flag practice and 41 escalation memos written in the language of efficiency across 2 years and 2 different directors. Gerald Whitmore was removed from facilities leadership and offered a non-supervisory role through to his pension. He took it. He wrote Marcus a letter 4 sentences long that said in effect that he had signed things for 19 months without reading them, that this was not a defense, and that he knew it wasn't. Priscilla Vance was suspended pending review of the dual file practice, which was found to run back 7 years and to have been inherited. The practice was ended across every branch within the quarter. 11 managers received formal findings. None were dismissed. Marcus was specific with the board about why dismissing 11 people produces 11 replacements who have learned exactly one lesson, which is to be more careful about what gets written down. Claire came back once in the second week to clear the office behind the tinted glass. He was on 11, not in gray, standing near the baseboard where she had first seen him, talking to 2 members of the facility's crew about the West Freight elevator out of service since spring repair authorized, within an hour of the January meeting. She stopped at the end of the corridor with a box in her arms. "I need to ask you something." He came down the hall. "October. You could have ended it that day. 1 call and I'd have been gone by 2 of the afternoon." "Yes. Then why let it run 3 more months?" Marcus looked at the box, then passed her down the length of the 11th floor at 40 desks, where 40 people were not looking at them and were very obviously listening. "Because if I'd made that call in October, everyone in this building would have spent the rest of their careers telling themselves it had been you." Her arms tightened around the box. "You raised a mop over your head. 400 people made it funny. In January, you said a janitor wasn't qualified to stand in a room, and 300 people agreed with you by saying nothing. If I'd removed you in October, they'd have been the audience. They'd have gone home clean. So I was the demonstration. You were the cause," he said. "They were the reason it worked." She stood there a long moment with the weight of the box changing in her arms. "You know what? I've been trying to work out," Claire said. "It isn't that I was wrong about who you were. I've made peace with that faster than I expected. It's that if you had actually been a janitor, if there'd been no company, no board, nothing behind you at all, I would have done every single thing exactly the same, and I'd still be running this floor. And not one person in this building would have thought there was anything to talk about." He didn't soften it. "That's the finding. That's what's in the report." Claire nodded slowly, carried the box to the elevator, and did not look back at the floor she had run for 3 years. Marcus supervised the branch directly for 6 months and appointed an acting director from the regional office, which the board initially resisted and then stopped resisting. He rewrote the exit interview process so that it was conducted regionally and never by the branch. He abolished the loading dock and stairwell assignments and restored the rotation to what it had been in September. He had the sign taken off the microwave on 9, which several people found strange, and 2 people understood completely. Walter Briggs was made facility supervisor for the building at a wage that reflected 19 years. He objected for about 4 minutes on the grounds that he did not do paperwork and was told that the last man who did paperwork for facilities had signed 4 schedule changes without reading them, and that Walter's specific value was that he would read them. Dwayne Falk kept the security desk and was named to the review panel that heard concerns from contract staff, which he found faintly ridiculous until the first hearing, after which he did not. Ruth Ellison stayed. She was still there in the second year on the same floor, at a desk nobody had moved on a Friday. Nora Delaney was moved into operations. She came to his office the day it was announced and said from the doorway that she wasn't sure she had earned it because she had sat down in January when her hand started to move. "You noticed your hand?" Marcus said 300 people didn't. "That's the whole difference. It's smaller than you think, and it's the only thing this building has to build on." The number he had come for changed in the second year. Departures fell from 31 to 4, and 2 of those were relocations. Ridgeline never became a model branch. It became an ordinary building where the elevators worked and people spoke to each other in ordinary ways, and where the newest hires had no idea why the older ones sometimes went quiet in the atrium. Marcus Carter ran the parent company for another 11 years and never gave an interview. He said one thing publicly on the subject in a letter to shareholders, and a number of people repeated it afterward without knowing where it came from. That any company can be measured accurately in about 10 minutes by watching how it treats the people it has decided are beneath its attention. The last time he walked through the 9th floor break room, he stopped at the microwave. The tape had left a pale rectangle on the metal that nobody had ever cleaned off. He left it.